On a brittle February morning in 2008, in the small farming community of Chadron, Nebraska, a place where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and children played unsupervised in dusty yards, a young woman named Jennifer Marie Caldwell vanished from her modest ranch house on the edge of town. She was 23 years old, a recent graduate of Chadron State College with a degree in elementary education, and she had been planning her wedding for the following summer. Her fiancé, Marcus Allen Hastings, 27, a mechanic at the local agricultural equipment dealership, told authorities he had last seen her at approximately 7:30 that morning when he left for work. When he returned home at 5:45 that evening, the front door stood slightly ajar. Her purse remained on the kitchen counter. Her car sat in the driveway, but Jennifer was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, no explanation. The question that would haunt Dawes County for nearly 15 years was deceptively simple. Where had she gone, and why had she never come back? The town of Chadron sits in the northwest corner of Nebraska, a windswept region of rolling prairie and pine-studded buttes that rise like ancient sentinels from the grasslands. Population hovering just above 5,000. The community survived on agriculture, the state college, and the kind of interdependence that develops when the nearest city of any size lies more than 100 miles away. The Caldwell Hastings residence stood on Morrison Road, a gravel stretch that ran parallel to Highway 20 on the southern outskirts of town. The house itself was unremarkable, a single-story structure with fading white siding and a detached garage that Marcus used as a workshop. Behind the property, empty fields stretched toward the horizon, brown and dormant beneath the February sky.
Jennifer Marie Caldwell had grown up in Alliance, Nebraska, about 60 miles south of Chadron, the daughter of Robert and Susan Caldwell, both school teachers. She had been a quiet child, they said, studious and kind, the sort of girl who volunteered at the library and helped organize church socials. She met Marcus Hastings during her sophomore year at Chadron State. He was a local boy, born and raised in Dawes County, the youngest son of a ranching family that had worked the same land for 3 generations. Those who knew them said they seemed happy together, though some noted that Marcus could be possessive, that he sometimes called Jennifer multiple times during the day to check where she was, that he preferred she not go out with friends without him. But in a small town, people often dismissed such things as protectiveness, as the intensity that sometimes accompanies young love. The morning of February 14th, Valentine's Day, began ordinarily enough. Marcus later told investigators that he woke at 6:15, showered, dressed in his standard work uniform of denim and flannel, and found Jennifer already awake in the kitchen making coffee. The house smelled of French roast and the faint lingering scent of the candles she liked to burn in the evenings. She wore gray sweatpants and one of his old college sweatshirts, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. They exchanged Valentine's greetings. He gave her a card he had picked up at the drugstore the previous evening. She smiled, kissed him, told him she had something special planned for dinner that night. He said he would be home by 6. The dealership closed early on Thursdays during winter, and he had promised to pick up groceries on his way back. They talked about the wedding, about the guest list, about whether they could afford to honeymoon in the Black Hills, or if they should save the money for a down payment on a larger house. Normal conversation between two people planning a future together. Marcus said he left the house at approximately 7:28, backing his truck out of the driveway while Jennifer stood at the kitchen window, waving. He remembered that detail specifically. He told deputies later, because he had looked back and seen her silhouetted there, the morning light behind her. The drive to Morrison Agricultural Equipment on East 2nd Street took 11 minutes in good conditions. He clocked in at 7:41, according to the time card that investigators would later examine. His supervisor, Dale Thornton, confirmed Marcus arrived on schedule and worked through the morning without incident, repairing a combine harvester that had thrown a belt and servicing 2 tractors that needed oil changes before spring planting season. Jennifer, meanwhile, had no obligations that day. She had graduated the previous December and was waiting for a teaching position to open, substitute teaching occasionally, but mostly staying home, planning the wedding, looking after the house. Her best friend, Amanda Richter, who lived in town near the college, later told investigators that Jennifer had called her around 8:30 that morning, sounding cheerful, mentioning she was thinking about baking cookies and asking if Amanda wanted to come over later. Amanda said she had classes until 3 but could stop by after. Jennifer said that would be perfect. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. It was the last time anyone who knew Jennifer well admitted to speaking with her. At approximately 5:45 that evening, as the winter darkness settled over Dawes County and the temperature dropped towards single digits, Marcus Hastings pulled his truck into the driveway on Morrison Road. He carried 2 bags of groceries, items for the special dinner Jennifer had mentioned that morning. The porch light was off, which struck him as odd because Jennifer usually turned it on before sunset. When he reached the front door, he found it standing open about 6 inches, cold air flowing into the house. He called her name. No answer. He stepped inside, still holding the groceries, and called again. The living room was undisturbed. The television was off. Her cell phone lay on the coffee table. He walked through to the kitchen and set the bags on the counter, noticing that nothing appeared out of place. No dishes in the sink. The coffee pot still contained the morning's brew, long since cold. Her purse sat where it always sat, on the small table near the refrigerator. Her keys hung on the hook by the back door. Her car, a blue Honda Civic, remained parked in the driveway where she always left it. Marcus went through the house room by room, checking the bedroom, the bathroom, the spare room they used for storage. Nothing seemed disturbed. The bed was made. Towels hung neatly in the bathroom. He opened the back door and looked out across the fields, seeing nothing but empty land and gathering darkness. He called her cell phone from his own, hearing it ring on the coffee table. That was when he called the Dawes County Sheriff's Office, his voice, according to the dispatcher's later testimony, tight and worried but controlled. He reported his fiancée missing. He said the door had been opened, that she was gone, that her car and phone and purse were all still there, that nothing made sense. The dispatcher told him to stay at the house, that deputies were on their way. The first responding officer, Deputy Thomas Erickson, arrived at the Morrison Road residence at 6:07, just 22 minutes after Marcus made the call. Deputy Erickson later wrote in his incident report that he found Marcus Hastings standing in the driveway, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The house lights were all on now, every window glowing yellow against the darkness. Marcus repeated what he had told the dispatcher, adding that he had walked around the property calling for Jennifer but had found no sign of her. Deputy Erickson asked if they had argued that morning, if Jennifer had seemed upset or mentioned going anywhere. Marcus said no, everything had been fine, better than fine. It was Valentine's Day. They had plans. Deputy Erickson went through the house himself, noting the undisturbed state of things, the presence of Jennifer's personal belongings, the absence of any obvious signs of struggle or forced entry. He radioed for additional units and for the sheriff. By 7:30, Morrison Road had transformed into a command center of sorts. Sheriff's vehicles parked along the gravel shoulder, portable lights set up to illuminate the property. Sheriff Daniel Kovacs, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement in Dawes County, arrived and conducted his own walkthrough of the house. He interviewed Marcus Hastings in the kitchen, asking detailed questions about the timeline, about Jennifer's state of mind, about their relationship, about anyone who might wish her harm. Marcus answered each question directly, maintaining that everything had been normal, that Jennifer had no enemies, that she was loved by everyone who knew her. When asked if Jennifer might have left voluntarily, Marcus became emotional, insisting she would never do that she had been excited about the wedding, about their future, that leaving made no sense. The temperature that night fell to 4 degrees below zero. Search and rescue protocols in winter conditions require immediate mobilization because exposure can become life-threatening within hours. Sheriff Kovacs organized an initial search pattern focusing on the immediate area around the house, sending deputies in widening circles across the frozen fields with high-powered flashlights. Volunteers from the fire department arrived with portable heaters and thermoses of coffee. The search continued through the night, voices calling Jennifer's name into the darkness, flashlight beams sweeping across dormant prairie grass, and patches of crusted snow that had fallen the previous week and never fully melted. At first light on February 15th, the search expanded significantly. The Nebraska State Patrol sent additional personnel. Volunteers from Chadron and surrounding communities arrived by the dozens, organizing into grid patterns under the direction of search and rescue coordinators. They walked fence lines and irrigation ditches, checked abandoned farm buildings and hunting cabins scattered across the county, knocked on doors at every residence within a 5-mile radius asking if anyone had seen Jennifer or noticed anything unusual the previous day. Local television stations from Scottsbluff and Rapid City sent news crews. Jennifer's photograph appeared on the evening news, a smiling young woman with blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, wearing the Chadron State sweatshirt she had on in the most recent picture her parents could provide. Jennifer's mother and father, Susan and Robert Caldwell, drove up from Alliance on the morning of the 15th, arriving at the Morrison Road house to find it surrounded by law enforcement vehicles and volunteer searchers. Those who witnessed the reunion between the Caldwells and Marcus Hastings described it as heartbreaking. Susan collapsed into Marcus's arms, sobbing, asking where her daughter was, begging him to tell her what had happened. Marcus, according to witnesses, wept alongside her, repeating that he did not know that he had come home and she was simply gone. Robert Caldwell, normally stoic and reserved, stood in the driveway with tears streaming down his face, staring out at the search teams moving methodically across the landscape. The investigation during those first crucial days focused on several parallel tracks. Detectives interviewed Jennifer's friends, her former professors, her coworkers from the various substitute teaching assignments she had taken. Everyone described her as responsible, dependable, happy in her relationship with Marcus. Amanda Richter, the best friend who had spoken with Jennifer the morning she disappeared, told investigators that Jennifer had never mentioned any problems, had never expressed fear or concern about anything. The wedding planning had been going well. She was excited about starting her teaching career. There had been no indication whatsoever that she might leave or that something might be wrong. Simultaneously, investigators began examining Marcus Hastings more closely. This is standard procedure in any missing person case involving a romantic partner, but in this instance, certain details began to accumulate. Marcus's supervisor at Morrison Agricultural Equipment, Dale Thornton, confirmed that Marcus had clocked in at 7:41 on the morning of February 14th and had clocked out at 5:17 that afternoon. The drive from the dealership to Morrison Road took 11 minutes. That meant Marcus should have arrived home around 5:28, but he reported arriving at 5:45, a 17-minute discrepancy. When questioned about this, Marcus explained that he had stopped at Safeway to pick up groceries, as he had mentioned. Investigators checked the Safeway on West Highway 20 and confirmed that a transaction had been made on Marcus's debit card at 5:31 that afternoon, purchasing the items found in the grocery bags. The store sat approximately halfway between the dealership and the house, and the timing seemed to account for the gap reasonably well. Still, detectives noted other things. Marcus's demeanor remained notably composed throughout the initial interviews. While he showed appropriate emotion when discussing Jennifer's disappearance, he also demonstrated a kind of control that struck some investigators as unusual. Deputy Michael Chen, who conducted several of the early interviews, later wrote in his notes that Marcus seemed almost rehearsed in his responses, that he answered questions quickly without the fumbling or confusion that typically accompanies genuine shock and distress. Chen also noted that Marcus consistently referred to Jennifer in past tense during the first day of questioning, saying things like she was excited about the wedding and she loved teaching, rather than she is excited or she loves teaching. When Chen pointed this out, Marcus became defensive, saying he was exhausted and not thinking clearly about verb tenses. The search continued through the weekend. Temperatures remained brutally cold, making extended outdoor exposure dangerous for both searchers and, if she was out there somewhere, for Jennifer herself. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the county, looking for heat signatures that might indicate a person. Dive teams checked stock ponds and the small reservoir north of town, though the water was frozen and the ice would have to be broken to search beneath. Tracking dogs brought in from the State Patrol unit picked up Jennifer's scent at the house, but lost it at the end of the driveway, suggesting she had left the property in a vehicle. That detail became increasingly significant. Jennifer's car remained parked at the house. Marcus's truck had been with him at work all day, and its odometer reading matched the normal daily commute. If Jennifer had left in a vehicle, it had to have belonged to someone else. Investigators compiled a list of everyone Jennifer knew who might have visited that day, everyone who might have given her a ride somewhere. Friends, family members, delivery drivers, utility workers. Each person was located and interviewed. None admitted to seeing Jennifer on February 14th. None could account for her whereabouts. As the investigation wore on, public interest intensified. Missing person flyers with Jennifer's photograph appeared in every business window in Chadron, in Alliance, in Crawford and Gordon, and every small town within 100 miles. A reward fund was established, growing quickly to $15,000 contributed by community members who wanted to help bring Jennifer home. Vigils were held at the Chadron State campus and at the First Methodist Church, where Jennifer and Marcus had been planning to marry. Television news coverage expanded beyond local stations. Regional newspapers ran features about the mysterious disappearance. On internet forums devoted to missing persons cases, amateur sleuths began offering theories, most of them focusing on Marcus Hastings as the most likely suspect, though no evidence had emerged to support that conclusion. Clear's throat. Those who knew Marcus said he seemed to age visibly during those weeks. He continued living in the house on Morrison Road, continued going to work at the dealership, but neighbors reported that he stopped maintaining the property, that the lawn grew unkempt, that he rarely turned on lights even after dark. He cooperated fully with investigators, submitting to multiple interviews, allowing them to search the house and property repeatedly, providing access to phone records and financial documents. Polygraph examinations are not admissible in Nebraska courts, but Marcus voluntarily took one administered by an examiner from the State Patrol. The results were inconclusive, showing stress responses on questions about Jennifer's disappearance, but nothing that definitively indicated deception. physical evidence remained frustratingly sparse. Crime scene technicians processed the Morrison Road house thoroughly, using luminol to check for blood evidence that might have been cleaned up, examining drains and carpets and furniture for any sign of violence. They found nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred inside the residence. The open front door remained the only anomaly, and it was possible, though unusual, that Jennifer had simply left it open when she departed for some reason no one yet understood. The investigation into Jennifer's digital footprint proved equally unproductive. Her cell phone, left behind at the house, showed no unusual calls or messages. Her laptop computer, examined by forensic technicians, contained nothing suspicious, just wedding planning documents, job application materials, and the ordinary detritus of a young woman's digital life. Her social media accounts, primarily Facebook and an inactive MySpace page, showed no signs of communication with anyone unknown to investigators, no hints of secret relationships or plans to leave. Her bank account showed normal activity, small purchases at local stores, nothing unusual. There had been no large withdrawals of cash, no suspicious transactions. For those who have ever watched a missing person investigation lose momentum, who have seen the search teams diminish day by day until they disappear entirely, the trajectory of the Jennifer Caldwell case followed a familiar and heartbreaking pattern. By the end of February, active searching had largely ceased. The helicopters returned to their bases. The volunteer searchers went back to their jobs and families. The news crews moved on to other stories. The investigation transitioned from an active search to a cold case, from urgent daily developments to periodic reviews of evidence that never seemed to yield new leads. Sheriff Kovacs held a press conference on March 1st, acknowledging that despite extensive efforts, Jennifer Caldwell had not been found, and investigators had no clear leads regarding her whereabouts. He emphasized that the case remained open and active, that any tips or information would be investigated immediately. But the subtext was clear to everyone watching. They had run out of options. The months that followed were, by all accounts, agonizing for Jennifer's family. Susan and Robert Caldwell made the drive from Alliance to Chadron several times each week, meeting with investigators, distributing flyers, organizing volunteer searches of their own. They appeared on local television programs, pleading for anyone with information to come forward, begging whoever might have taken their daughter to let her come home. They hired a private investigator, a retired FBI agent from Omaha who reviewed the case file and came to the same frustrating conclusion that law enforcement had reached. Jennifer Caldwell had vanished without leaving behind evidence sufficient to explain what had happened to her. Marcus Hastings became increasingly isolated. The suspicion that naturally falls on romantic partners in missing person cases never entirely dissipated, and while he was never formally named as a suspect, many in the community believed he knew more than he was saying. He stopped attending church. He stopped socializing with the friends he and Jennifer had shared. At work, coworkers reported that he performed his duties adequately but mechanically, speaking only when necessary, eating lunch alone in his truck. Dale Thornton, his supervisor, later said that Marcus seemed hollowed out, like something essential had been removed and only the shell remained. Summer arrived, then autumn. The wedding date that Jennifer and Marcus had chosen, June 21st, passed unmarked except by the Caldwells, who held a small memorial service at the Methodist Church, praying for their daughter's safe return and placing flowers at an empty chair that represented her absence. The reward fund remained unclaimed. Tips to the sheriff's office became increasingly rare and increasingly implausible. psychics called claiming to have visions. Conspiracy theorists suggested elaborate scenarios involving human trafficking or government cover-ups. None of it led anywhere. In October of 2008, Marcus Hastings put the house on Morrison Road up for sale. The listing described it as a well-maintained 3-bedroom ranch home on 1 acre, but it failed to mention that a young woman had vanished from it 8 months earlier. The house sat on the market for nearly a year before finally selling, at a significant loss, to a family relocating from out of state who likely never learned its history. Clears throat. Life continued as it always does, even in the shadow of unsolved tragedy. Susan Caldwell took a leave of absence from teaching and never returned, unable to stand in front of a classroom knowing that somewhere her daughter should have been doing the same. Robert continued working but grew withdrawn and distant, according to friends who tried to maintain contact. The Caldwells became members of a community no one chooses to join, the families of the missing, those who exist in an endless present tense where hope and grief occupy the same excruciating space. The investigation, meanwhile, had indeed gone cold. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had taken lead on the case after the initial response phase, reviewed the file periodically, following up on any new tips, but she later admitted in interviews that by 2009, she believed Jennifer Caldwell was deceased and that finding her remains was the best outcome the family could hope for. The question was not whether something terrible had happened, but where and how and at whose hands. Marcus Hastings, for his part, left Dawes County in late 2009, relocating to Wyoming where he found work at a ranch supply company outside Gillette. He rented a small apartment and lived quietly, maintaining minimal contact with anyone from his previous life. To the few who asked, he said he could not stay in Nebraska, that everywhere he looked he saw Jennifer, that the weight of her absence had become unbearable. Whether this was the grief of an innocent man or the conscience of a guilty one remained a matter of speculation. The years accumulated. 2010 became 2011 became 2012. The Caldwells maintained Jennifer's missing person page on social media, posting updates on her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance, sharing information about other missing persons cases, advocating for families in similar situations. They never stopped hopping, though hope transformed over time from the expectation that Jennifer might walk through their door to the more modest wish that they might someday know what had happened to her, that they might have closure, whatever that meant. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the terrible uncertainty that comes when trust and suspicion exist simultaneously, the position of Jennifer's family was particularly cruel. They had loved Marcus like a son. They had welcomed him into their family, had celebrated his engagement to their daughter, had looked forward to grandchildren and holidays, and all the ordinary joys that come with expanded family. And yet, as the years passed without answers, without Jennifer, they could not help but wonder, had they missed something? Had there been signs they failed to recognize? Had their daughter tried to tell them something they had been too blind or too trusting to see? In 2013, 5 years after Jennifer's disappearance, the case was officially reclassified as a cold case homicide, acknowledging what everyone had long suspected, that Jennifer Caldwell was not coming home alive, that she had been the victim of a crime, that somewhere out there was a person who knew exactly what had happened to her. The reclassification prompted a brief resurgence of media attention. National crime shows featured the case. Online forums dissected the evidence. But without new leads, the attention faded once again. Then in the spring of 2022, 14 years after that February morning when Jennifer vanished, something shifted. A woman named Rachel Hastings, formerly Rachel Brennan, walked into the Dawes County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak with someone about the Jennifer Caldwell case. Rachel was 32 years old, a nurse at the Chadron Community Hospital, and she had married Marcus Hastings in 2015, 7 years after Jennifer's disappearance. The marriage had lasted 6 years before Rachel filed for separation in early 2022. Now, sitting across from Detective Morrison, who had remained with the department and had never stopped hopping for a break in the case, Rachel said there were things she needed to say, things Marcus had told her, things she could no longer keep silent about. Clears throat. Rachel Hastings spoke carefully, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. She explained that she had met Marcus in 2014 while he was still living in Wyoming. He had seemed like a good man, quiet and hardworking, carrying obvious pain from the loss of his fiancée. That was how he had always characterized it. A loss, a tragedy, something that had happened to him rather than something he might have caused. They dated for several months before Marcus proposed. Rachel accepted, moved to Gillette, and they built what seemed like a stable life together. Marcus worked at the ranch supply company. Rachel found a nursing position at a local clinic. They bought a small house on the outskirts of town. For the first few years, Rachel said, things were good. Marcus was attentive and caring, though he rarely spoke about his past or about Jennifer. Rachel knew better than to press, assuming that the grief was still too raw, that he needed time to process the trauma of losing someone he had loved. But gradually, small things began to trouble her. Marcus became controlling about her schedule, calling repeatedly when she worked late shifts, questioning her about conversations with male colleagues, insisting that she text him whenever she left one location for another. When Rachel tried to discuss his behavior, suggesting that perhaps they should seek couples counseling, Marcus would become withdrawn and sullen, sometimes not speaking to her for days. In 2019, Rachel became pregnant. The pregnancy was unplanned but not unwelcome, and initially Marcus seemed excited about becoming a father. But as Rachel's pregnancy progressed, Marcus's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would wake in the night, covered in sweat, muttering about fields and frozen ground. He began drinking heavily, something he had not done earlier in their relationship. When Rachel confronted him about the drinking, Marcus told her that he was terrified of being a father, that he was afraid he would fail, that there were things about himself he had never told her, things he could never tell anyone. Their daughter, Emma, was born in March of 2020, just as the world was shutting down for the pandemic. The early months of new parenthood, challenging under any circumstances, became exponentially harder in isolation. Marcus lost his job at the ranch supply company due to pandemic-related cutbacks. He began staying home with Emma while Rachel worked at the clinic, which had become overwhelmed with cases. The arrangement should have fostered closeness, but instead Marcus seemed to retreat further into himself. Rachel would come home to find him sitting in the dark, Emma asleep in her crib, Marcus staring at nothing. One night in the summer of 2020, Rachel told Detective Morrison, Marcus came to bed after she had already fallen asleep and woke her, his face inches from hers, his breath sharp with whiskey. He said he needed to tell her something, that he could not carry it alone anymore. Rachel, frightened by his intensity, asked what he meant. Marcus began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush. He said that Jennifer had not disappeared. He said that Jennifer had never left the house on Morrison Road. He said that on the morning of February 14, 2008, they had argued. He could not even remember what the argument had been about, something trivial, something that should not have mattered. But Jennifer had said she was tired of him checking up on her all the time, that she felt suffocated, that she needed space. Marcus said he had grabbed her arm, trying to stop her from walking away from him, and Jennifer had pulled back hard. losing her balance, falling, striking her head on the corner of the kitchen counter. Rachel told Detective Morrison that she sat frozen in bed, listening to her husband describe how Jennifer had lain on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath her head, how he had knelt beside her and realized she was not breathing, how panic had consumed him. He said he had not meant to hurt her. He said it was an accident, but he also knew how it would look, that he would be blamed, that no one would believe him. So he made a choice. He wrapped Jennifer's body in a tarp from the garage and carried her out to his truck, waiting until darkness before driving out into the empty country beyond the house. He found a place, he told Rachel, a remote spot where no one would ever think to look, and he buried her there in the frozen ground, using a shovel from the garage, working through the night until the hole was deep enough and the earth was packed back over her. After he finished, Marcus told Rachel, he drove home, cleaned the kitchen floor where Jennifer's blood had been, rehearsed the story he would tell about finding the door open and her gone, and then he called the sheriff's office. Everything that came after, the searches, the investigations, the suspicions, he endured it all, maintaining his story because the alternative was admitting what he had done, and he simply could not. Rachel said that after Marcus finished speaking that night, he looked at her with tears streaming down his face and asked if she still loved him, if she could forgive him, if she understood that it had been an accident. Rachel, terrified and confused, did not answer. The next morning, Marcus acted as if the conversation had never happened. When Rachel tried to bring it up, Marcus became angry, accusing her of trying to trap him into saying things, insisting he had been drunk and talking nonsense. For the next 2 years, Rachel told Detective Morrison, she lived with the terrible knowledge Marcus had given her, unsure if she believed him, unsure what to do, terrified of destroying her daughter's life, terrified of what Marcus might do if she went to the police. But in early 2022, Marcus's drinking had escalated to the point that Rachel feared for Emma's safety. She took their daughter and moved in with her parents in Chadron, filing for separation and eventually divorce. And once she was away from Marcus, once she felt safe, the weight of what he had told her became unbearable. She could not live with the knowledge that somewhere Jennifer Caldwell's family was still waiting, still hopping, still suffering. So she came to the sheriff's office and told Detective Morrison everything. The case that had lain dormant for 14 years suddenly roared back to life. Detective Morrison immediately contacted the Nebraska State Patrol and the Dawes County Attorney's Office. A team was assembled to verify Rachel's account and, if possible, to locate Jennifer's remains. The challenge was that Marcus had never told Rachel exactly where he had buried Jennifer, only that it was somewhere in the open country outside Chadron, somewhere remote and unlikely to be disturbed. The search area encompassed hundreds of square miles of prairie and rangeland. On April 12, 2022, investigators drove to Gillette, Wyoming, and arrested Marcus Allen Hastings at the apartment where he had been living since Rachel left. Detective Morrison was part of the arrest team. She later described Marcus's reaction as eerily calm. When informed that he was being arrested for the disappearance and death of Jennifer Caldwell, Marcus simply nodded and said, "I wondered when you would come." He did not ask for a lawyer. He did not protest his innocence. He just stood quietly while they handcuffed him and led him to the waiting patrol car. During the drive back to Nebraska, Marcus began to talk. Without being questioned, without being prompted, he started describing that February morning in 2008, confirming many of the details Rachel had provided. He said the argument with Jennifer had been about wedding invitations, about whether to invite his cousin who had drinking problems. Such a small thing. Jennifer said she did not want drama at their wedding. Marcus said family was family and they should be included. The disagreement escalated. Jennifer said she was tired of his need to control everything. Marcus reached for her. She pulled away. She fell. The counter, the blood, the terrible silence that followed. Marcus directed investigators to a location approximately 12 miles southwest of Chadron, near an abandoned homestead that had not been occupied in decades. He described a depression in the land, partially hidden by a line of cottonwood trees that grew along a dry creek bed. On April 14, 2022, search teams mobilized at the location Marcus had identified. Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, they began the painstaking process of searching the area. It took less than 3 hours to locate what they were looking for. The remains were exactly where Marcus said they would be, buried approximately 4 feet down in soil that had been disturbed 14 years earlier. Forensic anthropologists from the State Crime Lab carefully excavated the grave, documenting everything, preserving what evidence might remain after so many years. The body was wrapped in the deteriorated remnants of a blue plastic tarp. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. These were the remains of Jennifer Marie Caldwell. The forensic examination revealed fractures to the skull consistent with impact against a hard edge, supporting Marcus's account of Jennifer falling and striking the kitchen counter. There was no evidence of additional trauma, no indication that Jennifer had been attacked or intentionally harmed beyond the initial injury. From a medical standpoint, the death appeared to have been accidental, exactly as Marcus claimed. The crime was not in how Jennifer died, but in what Marcus did afterward. Concealing her death, burying her body, lying to investigators, allowing her family to suffer for 14 years without answers. Marcus Hastings was charged with abuse of a corpse and making false statements to law enforcement. Nebraska law does not include charges for failing to report a death, but the prosecutor argued that Marcus's actions demonstrated consciousness of guilt and a deliberate attempt to avoid responsibility for Jennifer's death. The fact that the death itself appeared accidental complicated the legal picture significantly. Marcus's defense attorney argued that his client had panicked in the aftermath of a terrible accident, that his actions, while wrong, stemmed from fear rather than malice, that he had lived with crushing guilt for 14 years. The case generated enormous media attention when news of Marcus's arrest and the discovery of Jennifer's remains became public. The Caldwells released a statement through their attorney expressing profound grief and relief, grief that their daughter was gone and had been gone all along, relief that they finally knew what had happened and could lay her to rest properly. Susan Caldwell told reporters that while nothing could bring Jennifer back, knowing the truth allowed them to finally begin the grieving process they had been denied for so long. Public reaction in Chadron and across the region was intense and divided. Some viewed Marcus as a man who had made a terrible decision in a moment of panic and had paid for it with 14 years of psychological torment. Others saw him as a calculating liar who had allowed Jennifer's family to suffer needlessly, who had played the role of grieving fiancé while knowing exactly where Jennifer was, who had even married another woman and started a family while Jennifer lay in an unmarked grave in the prairie. Online forums exploded with debates about justice, accountability, and whether accidental death followed by concealment should be treated differently than intentional harm. The trial began in October of 2022. Marcus pled guilty to all charges, acknowledging in open court that he had caused Jennifer's death, even if unintentionally, and had made the conscious choice to hide that death rather than face the consequences. His attorney presented evidence of Marcus's deteriorating mental state over the intervening years, the nightmares Rachel had described, the drinking, the guilt that had eaten away at him. The prosecution countered that Marcus had functioned normally enough to maintain employment, to enter into a new relationship, to present himself as a productive member of society. all while keeping Jennifer's family in agonizing limbo. Judge Patricia Aldridge, presiding over the case, heard victim impact statements from Jennifer's parents, who described the incomprehensible pain of not knowing what had happened to their daughter, of imagining countless scenarios, of hopping against hope that she might still be alive somewhere. Susan Caldwell looked directly at Marcus and said, "You took our daughter from us twice, once when she died, and again when you chose to hide the truth. We will never forgive you for that second theft." On November 8, 2022, Judge Aldridge sentenced Marcus Hastings to 20 years in prison, the maximum allowable under the charges. In her remarks, Judge Aldridge acknowledged that Jennifer's death appeared to have been accidental, but emphasized that Marcus's subsequent actions represented a profound betrayal of trust, of law, and of basic human decency. She noted that Marcus had not simply failed to report an accident. He had actively deceived investigators, had participated in searches while knowing they would find nothing, had accepted condolences while concealing the truth. The sentence, she said, reflected both the seriousness of Marcus's crimes and the incalculable harm he had caused to Jennifer's family and community. Jennifer Marie Caldwell was laid to rest in a private ceremony in Alliance, Nebraska, attended by family and close friends, in December of 2022. The grave marker bore her dates of birth and death, February 3, 1985 to February 14, 2008, and a simple inscription, "Beloved daughter and friend, finally home." Marcus Hastings is currently incarcerated at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. He will be eligible for parole in 2037, by which time he will be 62 years old. His daughter Emma, now 4 years old, is being raised by Rachel and her parents in Chadron. Rachel has reportedly changed Emma's last name to her maiden name, Brennan, wanting to give her daughter a fresh start unconnected to the crimes of her father. The case of Jennifer Caldwell serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us most deeply, not necessarily through intentional cruelty, but through weakness, through fear, through the catastrophic choices we make when we place our own self-preservation above the humanity of others. For 14 years, a young woman lay in an unmarked grave while those who loved her searched in vain. The resolution brought not happiness but a kind of bitter relief, the painful clarity that comes when terrible questions finally have terrible answers. Justice, in this case, arrived not through brilliant detective work or technological breakthrough, but through the conscience of another woman who could no longer bear the weight of her husband's secret. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.